Craig Souser, and welcome to another JLS Short. This time we're going to talk about JLS and the 1980s. I did want to start with talking about business dress a little bit. I've been wearing suits because that was what we did in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. One of the things that my father was big on were cufflinks. These were pretty fancy. They're cufflinks that actually were his business card, and he had cufflinks from a number of the companies he represented, all of which I still own today, and JLS has cufflinks that we started a few years ago. So business attire has changed, and we'll speak to that more in the coming segments. I wanted to start this segment off by thanking two men who unfortunately are no longer with us, but they were very important mentors to me as I was going through my college years and then beginning in the business in the 80s. Ronald, Lamke, and Bob Reinhardt. They were tremendous advisors to me, and I still think of a lot of things they told me back in the late 70s and early 80s. After I got out of Lehigh, I decided to learn more about electronics and studied electronic and digital circuit design at Penn State in York, Pennsylvania. In addition to that, a good bit of what I learned over the years has been in that proverbial school of hard knocks, and that continues to this day. In the 80s, JLS expanded our product offering. The most notable product offering in the early 80s that we got into were Toshiba variable frequency drives, which became a big part of our business. We later started selling Toshiba servos, and even for a brief period, their robotic equipment. JLS moved from just selling components into integration and the systems business. We first started with variable frequency drives, doing all kinds of conveyor work for various companies in the area, putting them in panels and motor control centers, and providing them complete engineered solutions. This morphed into the introduction of electronic servo, again starting with Toshiba and some motion control products we worked with. And of course, that moved JLS into the world of software. JLS sold equipment that went on aircraft carriers, very, very large valves to control the main seawater. We sold frequency drives, as I mentioned, that went on everything from pretzel lines to Armstrong ceiling and floor tile lines. JLS, like many companies, invested in the early PC revolution. We started with a Tandy Radio Shack TRS-80 unit, introduced in 1980. It used 8.5-inch floppy drives. Don't have any more of those today, but they had a lot of memory back at that time. Like most companies, we later moved to PCs and the infamous MS-DOS, which we dreaded. It was a very cumbersome system and really not all that reliable, although it was used for many years, and even on some machine controls. Fortunately, Windows stepped into the picture. It had its challenges too, but it came a long way in the 80s. And of course, we all learned the famous three-finger salute for Microsoft with Control-Alt-Delete. I bought one of the first actual mobile phones, not a cell phone, but a mobile phone made by Motorola. It was large, it was expensive to purchase, and it was expensive to use, but it helped me greatly in my travels throughout our 5-state region that we were covering. Of course, a big change for me in my life was when I married Sue, who worked for the company for a brief period of time, and later in the decade, we had our two sons, Bill and Brian. JLS, as I mentioned earlier, we moved into the servo world in a big day. And we eventually, towards the end of the 80s, became a distributor and rep for Indramat, who was a major player in the market. That product offering and its evolution changed JLS forever, and we'll talk about that much more when we talk about the 90s. Thank you for your interest in JLS.